Well, all right, everybody. Well, this is How to Be a Great Tenor class. In years past, this class has been taught by such famous tenors as Rick Spencer, international fourth place medalist, by Tim Warwick, international champion, by Gene Cockcroft, international champion and a legend, and now it's taught by me. So, which name does not belong on this list? So I would be much more comfortable teaching the How to Be a Great Big Tenor class, but they don't offer that here. So instead, we'll just do the best we can. So I am under no illusions to come to you and claim to be a great tenor. In fact, I was going to ask them to put a question mark on the end of the class description here today, but I do know a lot of great tenors to go talk to. And so I've talked and gathered as much information as I possibly can to share that with you today. Now, I actually want to begin this evening by watching a clip of what many people who were there say is the greatest live quartet performance on the contest stage they ever saw. Were any of you was it Louisville or New Orleans in 1992? Maybe New Orleans? How many of you all were there in 92? How many of you saw the 92 contest? Anybody there live and in person?
No, I was.
Oh, okay, fantastic. Well, then this would be a great chance for all of us to enjoy this together. Now, how many of you happen to have your sheet music of Bright Was the Night? Anybody got it with you? Go ahead and grab it and get it out, okay? Gashouse Gang performed this piece, arranged for them by David Wright in the 1992 contest. They finished second that year by just, I think, like 18 points to Keepsake. It was a very, very close contest. So, a lot of people who were there will tell you that this was the greatest live contest performance they ever saw. Now, I want us to listen to this, and obviously we're all going to be especially focused in on the tenor part, since this is the tenor class. Here's what I want you to think about, and maybe even circle in your music. I want you to identify the spots in your music in which at least you perceive that the tenor is really emphasizing his part, as opposed to more blending in the normal course of a song. Where are the spots that it sounds like to you that, well, the guy singing tenor, Kip Buckner, he must think this is really his time to shine, okay? And I would like for you to make note of where those spots are in the music, okay? So, without any further ado, let's see if we can get this bad boy to roll here.
We're standing there, moonbeams in her hair, starlight in her eyes so fair.
Maybe listen more than anything else. It's like an old martial arts movie right now.
Ever will I hold so deep within my soul. A loving vow she whispered low. That very night I found there never was a night so splendid, so bright was the night, bright was the night, moon shining bright, moon shining bright. Yes, it was there I met my sweetheart, sweetheart, Sue, my Sue. She promised me, she promised promised me that she would be, that she would be. She promised she would be my bride someday, some fine day. She promised she would be my bride someday, some fine day.
All right, so we're going to come back to that in a second, and I hope that by the time we come back to it, we'll have a better understanding of why the spots you marked on your music are the spots that he chose to really accentuate his part. All right, so what we want to do for the first part of this class is take some time and just talk a little bit about the role of the tenor. I've seen a couple of analogies that you may or may not find interesting. Different analogies click for different people. Dr. Greg Line uses the illustration of a car to talk about the different parts of a quartet. The bass he describes as the engine of the quartet. It provides that constant foundation to keep the quartet moving along. The leads are the people who drive the car. They kind of steer it in the direction it's going to go. Baritones are the transmission, which they just kind of are always shifting gears, you know. And tenors, well, in this analogy, they're the paint. So what he means by that is brilliant, sparkling colors of paint. Now, another analogy that I have seen is by Kevin Keller, fantastic music judge and coach. What he says is that in a quartet or chorus, the basses are actually the leads. Very similar to Dr. Greg saying they are the engine. They really do kind of, in that sense, lead the flow of the music. The leads are the personality. They tell the story with the bass as that great foundation. And then Kevin describes baritones as, he uses the term the anti-melody. We'll use the term counter-melody, to be not so antagonistic. The point is that the baritone is always going above and below the lead. When he goes below the lead, he is basically in the melody role, as he's describing this role here. And his rule of thumb for baritones is never win, but never lose. Never win, never overbalance the lead, but never lose. Never become so insipid. There needs to be pretty equal balance overall. Well, then Kevin describes tenors as the articulators. That's his term for tenors, articulators, providing sparkling diction to the quartet. So now let me ask you this question. In these two analogies, though they are very different in some respects, what do you see as some of the common denominators in the way the tenor part is described? Yeah.
Sparkling.
All right, sparkle, that's one of the common denominators, right? Yeah.
I was scratching my head.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right, yeah. Well, I'm sorry, what did you have?
I didn't have it.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, go right ahead.
Color, but metaphorically.
Color, but metaphorically color. You know, the brilliance and shine. Yeah, those are all aspects of what it is that the tenor part provides to the quartet. That's the role that we have. Now, the problem is there are a lot of common conceptions about singing tenor that actually create hindrances to providing that sparkling, brilliant tone that these analogies provide. I don't know how many of you all are old enough to remember the old TV cartoon show, Fat Albert, but there was a character called Mushmouth. All right. Well, a lot of tenors have been taught that you're basically just supposed to float your part in. Anybody ever told you that?
Yes.
As a tenor, just float that part in. And so part of the floating of the part in is you just, basically, somebody said to me, when you're a tenor, all you have to do is sing the vowels. That's all you got to do. You ever heard somebody say it? Well, that's mushmouth singing. Well, there's no possible way you can provide sparkle, Kevin Keller's term, articulation, brilliant diction, if you're going to your way through a song. And so that is a misconception, and it's really a hindrance to what the tenor's primary role is. And so the way to solve this problem is, as a tenor, you have the crucial responsibility of providing articulation in the quartet, following all of the proper rules that you were taught in other classes about word-sound connection. So in other classes, or in rehearsals or whatever, the two rules of thumb for word-sound connection are, when you come across consonants that are singable, N, G, N, M, etc., you need to energize those. And when there are consonants that are not singable, like T or K, you do what's called transposing. Does anybody know what that term means, transposing?
I don't know in this context.
Okay, I'll give you an illustration. In the phrase, my wild Irish rose, the letter D is a consonant. It is not singable. You cannot create a tone with the letter D. So what transposing means, you take non-singable consonants and transpose them to the beginning of the next word. So that if you were to write it out on paper, my wild Irish rose. You see what just took place here? So if you were to speak it, even if you were to speak it, most people in normal conversation do not talk like this. My wild Irish rose. In normal conversation, how would we say that? My wild Irish rose. In normal conversation, we do this all the time. We just don't necessarily know the term for what it is. Well, barbershop singing is inherently a conversational form of singing. And so when you sing, you would just simply, as you would in conversation, transpose non-singable consonants. But you're still singing them. It's not my wild Irish rose, it's my wild Irish rose. If you were doing it in super slow motion, you all see that point? Okay. So you're not mush-mouthing it, you are singing, it's just knowing what the rules are for how to properly articulate, but still articulate. Otherwise what happens is, you put a damper on the sound instead of that beautiful, colorful, sparkling articulation. Okay? Now another hindrance to this is, I was told, tenors are basically to be seen and not heard. You ever heard? Just floated in, the lazy man's part. And so consequently, what I'm told is, well, you just need to back off. You need to back off. So instead of singing, my wild Irish rose, oh, you need to back off. My wild Irish rose. The tone becomes completely unsupported. Because that's the way I've interpreted backing off and balance, is to not support the tone. The reality is, if you are to sing in a lower dynamic, it requires not less support and engagement, it requires far more. And as a matter of fact, the tone placement needs to go further forward rather than back. Instead of, my wild Irish rose, do that one time. My wild Irish rose. Instead of that, my wild Irish rose. Do that. My wild Irish rose. You hear how much more ring and the sound there is. You're still adjusting your dynamic, but lower dynamic does not equal less breath support. Lower dynamic equals more breath support. Lower dynamic does not equal dark covered tone. Lower dynamic means even brighter tone, because if we're to be the bright, articulate, sparkling aspect of the quartet, and going into a lower dynamic has the tendency for the sound to fall back, the only solution is to bring it forward even more. So Dr. Jim Henry, incidentally, the bass of the legendary Gashouse Gang Quartet, says, never sing soft. Never sing soft. So this would be a controversial statement, Bill. I hope you're getting this on recording right here. Never sing soft. Just sing a lower level of loud. And that's just a mental way of fooling yourself. Soft. My wild Irish rose. Lower level of loud. Very much engaged, very much supported, very much a more sparkling, brilliant tone. No, that's not good. That's trying to sing soft. When you try to balance as a tenor, the key is to learn how to sing with the same kind of engagement, even more energetic engagement, to sing a lower level of loud. I mean, think about it like this, guys. The two of the great hallmarks of barbershop singing are a 4-part harmony with the melody in the second voice and harmony in the top voice. That's us. And a predominance of 7th chords, which we frequently sing. It is not an overstatement to say that you and I as tenors are what makes barbershop barbershop.
That's right.
Yeah! So the last thing we want to do are fall into traps of lack of articulation, lack of support, lack of brilliance that diminish the very role that we are really assigned to do as barbershop singers. Any questions on just that's sort of the role of the tenor as seen in terms of the other roles of a quartet? Any questions or comments about that?
When I try to sing loud at a lower level, I sometimes lose the tone altogether, and that's lack of breath support.
Yes, absolutely. And losing forward placement as well in the tone. We'll talk about some exercises to work on toward the end to deal with that. Yeah.
This picture was brought to me where I'm trying to think what quotes we had. The quiet intensity.
Yeah.
You know, intense quiet.
Yeah. Think if you were to speak softly to someone, your natural tendency is to lean in. You're more physically intense when you speak softly. The same is really true with regard to our singing. And since we as tenors do have to have proper balance in the ensemble, we just need to remember that requires far more intensity and energy than otherwise. All right, now the second way to kind of analyze the role of the tenor is to do it in terms of the music, from just looking at the actual structure of barbershop music itself. Now, to do this, we need to be reminded of a couple of basic things. We're going to do some fairly elementary music theory today. How many of you predominantly learn your music by listening to learning tracks? Predominantly. How many of you are more like reading the music and working through it that way? How many of you kind of do both, honestly? Yeah. So I think a lot of us fall into that boat. There are people who have won medals, who've won gold medals, who really can't read music at all. My friend Bill Billings, who was a baritone and won a medal with Sidekicks in 1989, and then also later on with what were they called? Bayside Edition, I think maybe. I don't think he even reads music, but he hears the chords and he knows how to balance and tune them. My friend Cindy LeMasters, who's the baritone for Showtime, the Sweet Adeline champion, she doesn't read music. She just hears it, all right? So we're going to talk here in just a second about understanding chords and why tenors sing what they do and what it calls for in our part. But if you think, well, wait a minute, I don't know all this music theory stuff, don't be alarmed at all. You probably are one of those people who just so intuitively get it, you just hear it. And that's fantastic. It's great to be able to do both of those, you know, and to expand your tools as a singer to be able to do the tenor part. All right, so with that caveat in mind, let's remind ourselves of some basic things. So typically, in a barbershop chord, we may have the root, and so let's just put one together. So all of our tenors here who also can sing bass Well, you just go. And then let me have a couple of you guys over here go. So that's the third. And then a couple of you guys over here go. So that's the fifth. So that's the seventh chord, a barbershop seventh chord. Very good. So typically in any of these given chords, what we are going to have is the root. And then we're going to have the fifth. And then we're going to have a third. And then quite often we have the barbershop seventh. And then we may also have an octave. Now anyone can be on any of these at any given time. Typically speaking though, if you were to take a wild guess in any barbershop chord as to who is on the root and the fifth, if you just had to guess, your best guess would be lead and bass would typically be on the root and fifth. And those...
In that order? Root?
No, not necessarily. They often swap back and forth. I'll show you an example in a minute. And that interval is very much a perfect interval. It's the kind of interval that you could play on a piano and it would sound pretty much in tune. It's a perfect interval, root and fifth. All right? Then we also have these thirds that creep into our music. Now, I want to illustrate something here. Have any of y'all ever taken the tune it or die class? Here? It's kind of a dramatic name, right? Oh man, it's one of my favorite classes I've ever taken. So, the way that chords tune properly has to do to a large extent with mathematics. They're mathematical ratios. A tone is really the vibration of molecules, air molecules. And the rate or frequency at which those vibrations occur is what determines one pitch from the other. So, the way that we tune in barbershop is what is called just intonation. It's perfect intonation. We tune chords perfectly. Theoretically, you could tune them perfectly on a piano. The problem is the ratios between the notes are not always of the same equal distance from one another. On a piano, you could maybe start with C, and you could perfectly tune the E, the third, and the G, the fifth, and the B flat, the seventh. The problem is not every song is written in C. And as soon as you went to another key, you'd be completely ruined. So on the piano, what they decided to do is, well, let's split the difference. We'll just make the 12 semitones all equally distant from each other. That's called equal tempo, or equal tuning. But what we do is just intonation. So let me illustrate with this pitch pipe app here. Here is, turn this up here. That with me? That's do. Now I want you to go up to 2 or re. And listen until you get it right in tune. Listen. You hear how flat that is?
Oh.
That's incredibly flat. All right. The proper tuning is what you did. All right. So what we do with our voices is called just intonation, as opposed to equal tempo. All right. So then the third. Let's do that. No, let's just do do re mi. All right. So. How sharp that is? All right. So a third, to be properly tuned, actually has to be slightly settled. The problem is our ears tend to settle them a little too much. And if you were going to guess in any given chord, if it's not tuning right, that someone is flat, the first culprit to look for is whoever is on the third. And it so happens that we as tenors are often on the third. So Joe Lyles has a funny saying. The third should be tuned just high enough to be just low enough to be just in tune. All right? So that's the third right there. All right? So go up with me again. sharp that is? Very good job. All right, guys. Now then, in barbershop, we love the barbershop 7th. All right, so here's Do. So here's the 7th. Now listen. See how sharp that is? All right. So the 3rd and the 7th, in order to be justly tuned, must be slightly settled. In fact, 7ths are settled even more than 3rds are. All right, so this is like barbershop tuning 101. All right, 5ths are perfect intervals. We don't get a lot of those. 3rds and 7ths must be properly settled to be in tune. Now here's what happens. Sometimes the note on the paper, from one note to the next, is the same note. But in the chord, it is a different function. And you can have a note that goes from one function to the other, even though it's the same note on paper. And that is what is required of us as tenors, is to see that. So, the late, great Jim Miller used to always say that in barbershop tuning there are no half steps. There are only 3/8 steps and 5/8 steps. And that is especially true for tenors. And I want to illustrate this point with you with a very common chord exercise. Now, pardon me while I switch over from one form of technology to another. Everybody here know the basic 5-chord exercise? All right, let's sing it in C. So can I have some volunteers to be leads? About 3, 4 of you here. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Ignore that just for a second here. So, here's your exercise as leads. Do that with me. A couple of you guys who are basses, let me have you do the bass part. So those 2 parts now. Very good. Can I have a couple of brave souls to do baritone? All right, Barry's, your part is going to be, just do 3 right here. Those 3 parts. No tenor, please. It should just be lead right now. Bass. Baritone. Go. Very good. Tenors. That's right. All right. Now, let's take a look at these chords here. Let me zoom in for just a second. Extreme close-up. All right. Can everybody read the notes up on the top line okay? Does this look too much like the eye chart at the... all right. So, let's do just a little bit of basic music theory here. All right. Just to illustrate something. This first chord here, the bass is on what? What note? I mean,
C.
C. The baritone is on...
G.
The lead is on, tenor is on. So what chord is this? This is a good old C major chord, right? So we've got the bass here on the root, baritone on the 5th, lead is on the octave, tenor is on the 3rd. Okay? Now we go to the next chord, all right? Notice what has happened, and this goes to your question right here. The lead and tenor are still on their same notes, right? What has the bass done? He's gone to G, so he's now on the 5th. So we've got lead on root, bass on 5th. Again, if you had to guess, it's not always true, but if you had to guess, that would be the best guess, that lead and bass are on root and 5th. Okay? Baritone has gone up to a B flat. So C, E, G, and now barbershop 7. Right? Now look at the next chord here. F, A, C, F. So now we have an F chord. Everybody with me? But notice what the tenor gets excited. Hey, that's an F chord and I'm on an F. But guess what? It's an octave. You see that? The bass is on the root. You're on an octave. Now, I haven't gotten to the section yet about balance, but here's the rule of balance. In any given chord, the root and fifth must be predominant. Thirds and sevenths must yield to the root and fifth. And octaves balance to the lower octave. The upper octave balances to the lower.
What's that mean?
What that means is that when the tenor is on that upper octave, he has to balance to the bass, yield to the bass, let the bass drive it, and he's simply there to reinforce the overtone. All right? So far, if you look at this very common chord exercise, the tenor was on what? What here? First, third, fifth, or seventh? All right, first is a third. Then the next one stays the same. Now we're on an octave. I'm going to call that an O. All right. Now look at the next chord here. Look at the next chord. We have a G, B, D, and F. So that makes a G7, right? Who is on the seventh? We are, right? That's the seventh right there. But notice, the note before on paper is the same, right? F to F. But what do our rules of tuning tell us? The seventh has to be settled, which means that even though it is the same note on paper, that has to be settled. You're going to have to bend it down. We're talking about by fractions, like by maybe 20%. But you have to do that in order for it to tune. And then we're right back to the first chord, all right, on the third.
And singing a little louder than the note before? The octave?
No, actually, because remember the rules of balance are going to be thirds and sevenths yield to the root and fifth.
Okay, both of them.
Yeah, right. So if you just look at the music, this is what the music calls for, all right? It calls for us to make these adjustments. So have you ever had this argument in a quartet rehearsal? You've got a piano, and the chord is not ringing. And you go, I know I'm on the right note, clang, clang, clang.
I do it all the time.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things that could be going on there. Vowel mismatch, timbre mismatch, placement mismatch. But I will tell you what one of the common things is. You're singing the note as on the piano,
Yeah.
but that ain't the note that's going to make the chord. All right? So let's do this exercise again. Everybody sing the same parts, just loo, 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 loo. And I want tenors to make the adjustment on this chord that you need to make. All right? Now, I don't want you to overcompensate. All right? We're talking about fractions here. But it's the fraction that makes the difference in the chord that rings and the chord that doesn't ring. All right, you follow me here? So where were we? Loo. So let me hear the first chord. So here we go. Start with the first chord. Nice. Very good job, guys. Very good job. Now let me also point something else out to you about tuning as a tenor. Jim Miller said there are no half steps. There are only 5/8 or 3/8. Let me illustrate what he meant by that. On paper, going from an F to an E is a half step down, right? Except if this note, in order to tune correctly, has to be settled, then the difference from this note to this one is not going to be a full half step, right? Because to tune this one, it had to be settled. So that means this is a classic example of why that is a 3/8 step. You follow that reasoning? And it's the reason why that third can often be too flat. Because we're thinking, okay, it's a half step down. Well, if you make it a full half step, 50% of a tone, that third's going to be flat, isn't it? So that's the tuning that we have to do as tenors to make the chords work. So I remember in the summer of 2000, I was living in the state of Florida, and I went to Florida's version of their harmony college. It's called the Sizzle. And I had a class with two gentlemen who unfortunately are now both gone, Eddie Williamson and Harry Williamson. Harry was the tenor of the Regents, I think maybe the 74 champs, something like that. And they did a class on balance and tuning. Now, I was a violinist for years in school, and sang in church for years, but I only read notes horizontally. I read my notes only going this way. Okay, I'm on an E, then an F, then an F, then an E. And what the Williamsons said is, if you're going to properly tune and balance chords, you have to start learning reading chords vertically, because it's a chord by chord kind of music. It was like the sky, the clouds parted, and it was like I finally started to get it for the first time. Because I would like sit down at a keyboard and play my part and think, why is this not working? Why is it just so slightly off all the time? Well, it's because I was only thinking horizontally. So you have to start thinking vertically. Now again, if you're thinking, well, I don't know any of this music theory stuff, that's not a huge problem, as long as you can train your ear to hear the chords ringing. The ringing tells you when it's right, okay? So you just have to get used to that. But being able to know chord by chord is a real plus for sure, okay? Any questions on this? Yeah.
In the exercise how the tenor goes from 7th to the 3rd,
yes,
the distance down is only 3/8 of a half step.
Yes.
Is that the same case? Sorry, is the same true in any case where you're moving from the 7th of the chord to the 3rd of the chord?
Yes. If in the chord one note is the 7th and then you move down, and on paper it's a half step, but in the chord it's going from a 7th to a 3rd. Yeah, you would always make this adjustment, which is why this exercise is a really good one to do. Now, there's one kind of exception to all this. What are you thinking about right now? Anything in particular?
Yeah, I think there's an example. I think it's in Heart of My Heart. Heart of My Heart, I love, and you're on the 3rd day, then you go to the 7th.
Right. Now, in that case, going from 3rd to 7th, we'll make it more of a 5/8 step. It's the reverse of that. You see what I'm saying? It's going to be slightly bigger. If it's I don't remember on the music, but if it's a half step on paper, but you're going from 3rd to 7th, since the 7th has to be settled even more, then that will become the 5/8 step. So you see that? There's no half steps for us anymore. You are free from half step responsibility. You're only to think of 3/8 or 5/8 steps. Now, leads have a different issue. Leads are tuning to the tonal center. So that's a different ball game for them. What we're tuning to is the chord. All right? So we have different rules that we follow here. Okay? Any questions on this point?
Did you just say that leads don't have to do this?
Leads are tuning to something different. They're tuning to the tonal center.
What does that mean? That
means, in this case, if I was a lead and I want to get my part in tune, I'm doing this. That's what they tune to. What the harmony parts tune to is the melody.
Okay.
And whatever those chords call for. Yep. Very good. Yeah.
What about when tenor has the melody?
We're going to get to that. Then, of course, when tenor has melody, normal rules of tuning would apply for us. It would be more tonal center at that point. But let's face it, guys, in the unjust world we live in, it just doesn't happen often enough, for sure. But, of course, if you have a tenor solo, then that would be the case. Yeah, great question. Yeah.
Okay, I do not read music.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to do vertical reading?
Very good. Well, the first thing is, I bet you do vertical tuning all the time, because your ear hears the ring. All right. So that's the cool thing about our style of music. It's an intuitive style. Your ear can kind of hear it. But here's what I would do. I'm going to show the illustration from Bright Was the Night here in a second. What I do is, I call Rick Spencer, my buddy Rick. I call Rick and say, hey, I can't figure this chord out. What is it? So, always try to improve yourself, you know. But like I said, your ear is the guide, ultimately, for the ringing of the chord. Once you understand how a chord is supposed to ring, for sure. Now, the rules of balance are on your sheet. I'm going to skip that slide because I want to show you something else. But the rules of balance, root and fifth is predominant. Thirds and sevenths defer to that. The octave on top defers to the lower octave. Now, there are certain occasions where the tenor does get to put a little more juice on the chord. I'm going to go look at the slide, but just look at your notes. This is on page 3 here, in what is often called a Chinese seventh. My wife calls them Oriental sevenths. You have to have the lingo down to that. But, so the Chinese seventh, the tenor is on the root. And the ensemble balances to the tenor. So let me show you an example of this. First of all, let me do it like this. Maybe the most famous Chinese seventh in barbershop history. Did any of you, when you were kind of marking your music, happen to mark this chord right here?
Yes, the tenor goes nuts.
Notice what the notes are. G, B, D, F. So that's a Chinese seventh. Now, normally in our music, the seventh is sung by the lead up here. But in this case, it's the baritone who's on that high seventh. All right? But the tenor is on the root right there. It's a G7 Chinese seventh. Okay? Maybe the most famous of all time in barbershop history. As opposed to, for example, look at the opening measures here. Look at what the tenor sings. Now, one of the first things I like to do in my music is I look for the octaves with the bass. That's kind of a rule of thumb for me because they're usually easy to spot. Notice, octave, 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 octave. See that? So the reason the tenor is balancing is because the tenor's on the upper octave all through those first couple of lines. Okay? Notice in this chord right here, we have B, D sharp, F sharp, A. So we're on the third of a B7 chord. Then notice over here we have G, B, D, F. That means we're on 7th. All right? And then here we have a C chord, and we're on the 3rd. So do you see why, just in terms of the rules of balance, you probably didn't mark a whole lot of spots on that first line as, well, the tenor is really coming out. Because the music simply did not call for it. It would not allow those chords to ring properly if he did. Yeah?
Now you've shown nothing but major thirds.
Yeah.
What's the rule for minor thirds? Do you settle those? Or?
Yeah, you settle them a little bit. Yeah. I have to settle them a lot because I apparently, my sunny personality does not like them. So I'm always way too sharp on them. So I have to frown to kind of get them to go down where they're supposed to be. But what I'm just trying to show you guys is there's a musical reason why the tenor does what he does to make the chords ring. All right? We just have to know where our spots are where we get to come out. What are those spots? All right, so I interrupted myself a second ago. Chinese sevenths where we are on the root. And that's what you have there in that classic ending of the intro right there on night. All right? Now, some other times when we get to come out. Look at page 3 of the music. Maybe the most famous series of chords of all time in a piece of barbershop music. She promised she would be my bride. Then we have that measure in 39. How many of you all marked 39 as a measure where you thought the tenor came out? Okay, that's exactly right. That's where he really comes out, I think, the most in the song. Here is the reason why. Notice what the very first chord is. It's G. All right, and so the tenor is on the root here. It's a G7 chord, right? G, B, D, F. Chinese seventh, tenor on the root, tenor must come out. You see that? Now, this next chord is the one that made me call Rick Spencer. I'm like, in music theory classes, I would be like music theory 3.5, like of the classes they have here. When it gets to 9s and 13s and that kind of stuff, then I'm really thrown for a loop. So this chord right here is actually a G9 chord, but the G, the root, is missing. That's why it would have taken me a million years. I'd have never figured this one out. All right? The main thing I want you to understand is the tenor is on a 9. there are certain chords, like 9 chords and 6 chords, which call for more equal balance among the 4 parts. This is one of them. All right? Then the tenor went right back down. Now this time, notice this chord here. It's hard to spell it properly. But it's basically D flat, okay, F, and then A flat, and then C flat, really, is what it would be. It's hard to spell it right either way. But the tenor is on the 5th. Yeah.
I've never taken any barbershop theory, but wouldn't those just be, wouldn't all those notes between those 2 Chinese 7th chords just be functioning as passing?
Sort of like passing tones?
Passing tones and neighbor tones?
It could be what it is. In old-time barbershop, they used to do what they called across-the-clock moves. In the chord structure, if you know what the circle of fifths is, they would do them across the clock sometimes. And what I actually asked David Wright, all right, sit down with me and explain these chords to me and why they were written like this. That's, by the way, one of the cool things about Harmony U. You just go talk to the legend, you know, and get the first-hand thing. Sure. And but it doesn't necessarily have to be a passing tone. A lot of times 9s and 6s are, and major 7ths as well. But in this case, they did not treat these like passing tones. They crushed each one of them. Yeah.
The one thing about the 3rd chord in measure 39 is it's a half. It's like a half diminished chord, I believe. And unfortunately, because of that, you can inharmonically spell it anyway.
That's right.
And it's like you can say, no, this is the root. No, if you spell it this way, this is the root.
Right.
And that's the unfortunate part about that chord.
Right. And as he said, this is what's called a half diminished chord. And so what that means is that it's going to call for equal balance again. And then you go right back to the Chinese 7th here. All right? So I'm just simply pointing out to you musically, what the tenor did is what the music called for to make the chords ring there. That's what our role is as tenors. Okay, so let me go back over here now. And I want you to listen to that performance again. And I want you to pay, again, really close attention, noticing how the tenor, now let's see, here we go. Why the tenor is singing the way he is. For example, listening to that opening measure and how the opening line rather, and how he sings it.
District Gas House Gang.
Saw her standing there, moonbeams in her hair, starlight in her eyes so fair, sweet radiance all around her.
By the way, 5th right
Never
there.
will
So
I
come out a little bit more.
so deep within my soul. Oh, loving how she whispers low. That very night I found her. There never was a night so splendid.
Here comes the big Chinese 7th. Now he doesn't pulverize it. But it's balanced properly. That's the key thing.
Bright was the night. Bright was the night.
Now, another little point here about tenor balancing. When we have duets with the lead, we can come out a little bit more to support the lead on that duet. So if you look now in measure 22, going on into 23, there's a duet part. I think the baritone may actually take the melody here, but the point is when there is a duet, tenor with somebody else, we can come out there when it's a tenor and the melody line. You all follow what I'm saying there? Okay.
Shining bright, shining bright. Yes, it was there I met my sweetheart, sweetheart, sweetheart.
By the way, that's called a scissor move. Do you all notice in measure 27, on the word Sue, the second chord, the tenor goes up, D to E to F. Y'all see that? The bass goes down from F to E to D. It's what we call a scissor move, because they're just moving opposite directions. And on a scissor move, the middle chord, there's going to be an octave with the tenor and the bass. So that's another good octave to mark because it helps as a point of reference for tuning, you see, when you have those. That's why it's so important in quartets and choruses to do tenor-bass duetting. Because think about that first page again. Remember when we marked all the octaves right through there? It's very important for tenors and basses to duet, to make note of those octaves, to make sure they really lock in. So they become loctaves instead of just octaves there. Okay? So be sure that you're aware of those.
She promised me that she would be, She promised she would be my bride someday, some fine day.
What movement was that in 36? Scissor again, right? Moving opposite directions with the bass, middle chord, octave, a good point of reference for tuning. By the way, just kind of glancing through the music, look up at 33 again. Measure 33. The first chord, F, A, C, F. Very much like the exercise we looked at a second ago. Tenors on the upper octave. All right. Then notice the next chord, if we spelled it a little bit more friendly, would be F, C, A, E flat. What chord is that? F7. All right. Then the next chord, C, C, G, E. So that's a C chord. Now notice on paper, you're going from would be E flat or D sharp to E. So on paper, what move is that up? Half step. But tuning from the 7th to the 3rd means it's going to be a 5/8 step. See how that principle applies? So you just kind of spot those through your music.
It's spelled that way.
Yeah. That's often why they don't spell things exactly correctly in our music. It's to help mentally lead us to what we need to do to tune. All right, and then let me stop so we can get to the testosterone part here. What tenors yearn for.
She promised she would be my bride someday.
All right, now let me interrupt him. Tagus interruptus here. So, couple things to notice. In 37, pretty high notes for a tenor, right? Seeing those C's right there. And if you wanted to be really nitpicky, the third one is 2 octaves from the bass. So you're thinking, well, he's supposed to yield, so he's got to be really quiet. Well, I'm sure as they worked on that as a quartet, they realized with our tenor hung up there like that, the dynamic simply can't be all that quiet. It'd be hanging him out on the end of a branch. So the rest of us need to fully support him. That's a part of the teamwork of a quartet. If you're going to hang somebody out to dry, well, no, you've got to support him. It's like in life. You can't just leave somebody hanging out there. So that's why the tenor is rocking it, even though it's 2 octaves, because he's up there really high. But the other guys, particularly the bass and baritone, have to really, or in this case it would be the bass and the lead, the root and fifth, really, and especially the fifth, have to help generate some support there for him. And then if you look in 41, the tenor hits the post and is on the root by himself. And so of course is going to be predominant until when? When does he have to yield power? That's right. To who? Yes, to Jim Henry. That's right. To the bass, because our rule of tuning and balance is the upper octave yields to lower. So you, when you're holding those posts, and it's just you en route, you absolutely need to be right in there. But then once the chord finally resolves, then you just say, oh, now I can just enjoy the moment and let those guys do the rest of the work. Because if I try to do too much, it'll actually bend the overtone down and it's going to reduce the harmonics. So now I'll yield to the octave, and then we'll just enjoy the ride as the angels sing. Okay? Now, I realize that for some of you, this kind of technical right brain analysis of the chords is just like hieroglyphics, and man alive, when we move on to something else. But some people, the way I'm wired is not so much right brain. I just like to always know, why does stuff work like it works? So to me, that's what this was all about. Just to show you why the tenor part works like it does, given the chord. This is a pretty typical kind of barbershop song, so it's a really good illustration of how the part works. Before we move on and talk about vocal production, any questions at all? Anything not clear that you'd like to go over as we kind of work through this song? Yeah?
It's not really about tuning, but can you give us some tips about posting?
Yes, absolutely. We're going to get to vocal production issues here in just a second. Yeah. Any other questions, though? Do you feel like if somebody said, explain to me the basics of how the tenor part works, that you kind of have a pretty good feel for what our role is and the rules that we kind of follow? All right, well, sorry,
Yeah, I've always had a difficult time determining the root of the chord.
Right.
Now, this may not be the forum for that.
Uh-huh.
Maybe that goes, because others here, I'm sure, have forgotten more about that than I'll ever know. But,
well, sometimes, like, can you plunk things out on a keyboard at all? Sometimes, like, I'm quite honestly, my music theory skills are not very good at all. But sometimes, if I just plunk the chord out, I actually just hear, well, that's got to be home bass. That has to be do. That has to be the root. But I don't always. And so, listen, I called Rick Spencer up and said, I don't understand how that 9 chord, I don't understand how it's spelled. I can't find the root, and I have no idea what this thing is. And he talked me through it and explained to me what it was. So hopefully there's somebody in your quartet or in your chorus who can be that guy for you. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with calling and asking for help. Yeah.
I know a quick tip. If you guys can read at least or know what the lines and the spaces are, note-wise, you could rearrange the chord into a snowman to where it's perfectly stacked one on top of each other, and that's how it's spelled out root third 5/7.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Good tip. Unless the root is missing, and then you're like me, it's absolutely lost. All right. All right, now, guys, what I want to do is turn from sort of the theoretical component of this to the practical component of how to actually vocally do the tenor part. I remember when I first joined the society in 1998, I went on the Harmonet on Yahoo group, and I said, I just started singing barbershop, and I'm really confused. When am I supposed to sing in falsetto, and when am I supposed to sing with more of my full voice? Now, some of you who are singing tenor, in some ways,